What if everything you believed about your compassion was a lie? What if your endless giving, your ability to feel other people's pain, wasn't proof of your strength, but a scar from a childhood where you were never allowed to exist for yourself? Carl Jung believed that behind the empath's kindness lies a secret one that, once uncovered, doesn't just change how you see others, it changes how you see yourself. Part 1. The child who couldn't be selfish. The empath isn't born. They are shaped. Beneath the surface of their sensitivity lives a child who learned one lesson too early. My needs are dangerous. My feelings are too much. My role is to keep others safe. Jung understood that what we call empathy in adults often begins as survival in children. Imagine the little boy who tiptoes around his father's anger before a word is spoken. The little girl who studies her mother's sighs as if they're code to be cracked. These children don't grow up believing in their own value. They grow up believing their safety depends on how well they can manage the moods of others. This is not a gift. It's programming. Their nervous system wires itself to become an emotional radar, tuned to every tremor in the room. And while the world later praises them as deeply caring or intuitively kind, Jung saw the hidden wound, the loss of what he called healthy selfishness, the ability to love yourself as much as you love others. Part 2. The empathic paradox. Here lies the paradox. The very skill that makes you sensitive to everyone else's inner world becomes the barrier that keeps you out of your own. You became an expert at reading the storms of others, but a stranger to your own sky. You can sense someone else's sadness across a room, yet struggle to name your own desires, your own needs, your own boundaries. Jung called this premature ego adaptation, when children grow psychological armor, not from healthy development, but from necessity. And though it worked in childhood, in adulthood it backfires, because the adult who cannot say no, who cannot rest, who cannot exist without serving, eventually collapses under the weight of their own suppression. Part 3. The shadow of the empath. But Jung made an observation few dared to say out loud. Hidden in the empath's unconscious, buried in what he called the shadow, is not cruelty, but forbidden selfishness. Think about it. Every time you were told, don't be difficult, don't be angry, don't be selfish, those natural parts of you didn't disappear. They were forced underground. The shadow of the empath isn't darkness. It's everything you weren't allowed to be. The right to say no, the right to be angry, the right to demand respect, the right to want something for yourself. And yet, most empaths feel guilty for even touching these parts. They believe their shadow makes them bad. But Jung saw the truth. These rejected impulses aren't flaws. They're the missing pieces of your wholeness. Part 4. The wounded healer. Jung described the empath who has lost touch with their healthy selfishness as a wounded healer. Someone who gives endlessly, but from emptiness instead of fullness. And here's the secret Jung revealed. The more you deny your shadow, the more it fights back. The person who always says yes eventually explodes with resentment. The caretaker who never rests begins to secretly hate the very people they help. The one who always sacrifices eventually longs to abandon everyone. Jung called this the law of compensation, the psyche's attempt to balance what's been suppressed. Push something down long enough, and it comes back with fury. That's why some empaths wake up one day, exhausted, bitter, even angry at their own compassion. Not because they're bad people, but because the psyche is begging for balance. Part 5. The individuation crisis. This breaking point is what Jung described as the individuation imperative, the moment when the soul demands you stop being who you were trained to be, and finally become who you are. For the empath, this often shows up as burnout. Not just fatigue, but a soul-deep exhaustion. Suddenly, helping doesn't feel noble, it feels heavy. The problems of others no longer inspire, they suffocate. And the voice inside whispers, I can't do this anymore. But Jung didn't see this as collapse. He saw it as emergence. The false self, the one who lived for others, begins to crack, so the authentic self can finally breathe. Part 6. Sacred selfishness. And here we arrive at Jung's most radical gift, sacred selfishness. The idea that the highest responsibility you have is to your own psychological growth. That taking care of yourself is not betrayal, it's obligation. Sacred selfishness isn't self-absorption. It isn't cruelty. It's the courage to say, my needs matter too. My rest is as valid as your urgency. My voice is as important as your demand. Jung understood that only when an empath embraces this sacred selfishness can they transform empathy from compulsion into choice. Only then can you give from fullness rather than depletion. Only then does your compassion become power, not prison. Part 7. Relational recalibration. But here's where it gets difficult. The moment you start living from sacred selfishness, relationships begin to shift. Jung called this relational recalibration. Some people, the ones who fed off your endless giving, will resist. They'll accuse you of being selfish. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. Others, however, will rise with you. They'll welcome your authenticity. They'll meet you as equals, not as functions. And those are the relationships worth keeping. As Jung wrote, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. True connection is not built on self-abandonment. It's built on mutual recognition. Part 8. From hypervigilance to conscious empathy. Jung saw that the empath's journey is not about discarding their sensitivity, but about transforming it. It begins as hypervigilant scanning for danger in childhood. It matures into unconscious empathy, giving without boundaries. And it must end as conscious empathy, the power to feel with others without losing yourself. This transformation requires 3 things Jung identified. 1. Emotional sovereignty, understanding that you're not responsible for other people's feelings. 2. Boundary consciousness, knowing where you end and others begin. 3. Need legitimacy, believing your needs are as valid as anyone else's. With these, empathy shifts from weakness to superpower, from burden to choice. Part 9. The freedom realization. And here lies Jung's final insight, the one that shatters illusions. Your empathy was never really about other people. It was about safety. It was your nervous system's way of controlling chaos. It was the child's attempt to make the unpredictable world feel predictable. This realization can be terrifying, because it means much of what you thought was love was actually fear in disguise. But it's also liberating, because once you see it, you can choose differently. You can decide, do I want to give, or am I giving because I'm afraid not to? This is what Jung called becoming the author of your own psychological story. Part 10. The rebirth of the empath. Of course, this shift isn't easy. It comes with grief, what Jung named identity grief. You mourn the version of yourself that lived only for others. You question, if I'm not the helper, who am I? But in that mourning, something new emerges. A self that is not chained to usefulness. A love that is not disguised control. A presence that is free. This is the integrated empath, the one who can care deeply without disappearing, who can say no without guilt, who can love without losing themselves. Jung saw them as the living proof of individuation, wholeness in action. So here is Jung's final truth about empaths. Your sensitivity is not your flaw. It's your unfinished development. You were never meant to give until you broke. You were meant to integrate your compassion with your right to exist fully, to reclaim your sacred selfishness, to choose empathy, not bleed it. And when you do, you stop being the child who was never allowed to be selfish. You become the adult who knows, my empathy is powerful, but my existence is sacred. That, Jung believed, is the privilege of a lifetime, to finally become who you truly are.